What's up, my dude? Spencer Turley making a No Man's Sky video? What the hell is this? 2016? I don't know, bro. It's insane. So, I haven't made a No Man's Sky video in infinity and beyond. I don't even know how long it's been. But this excites me right here. And I mean that from an honest, deep down standpoint. I know you're going to be seeing a lot of these No Man's Sky videos about No Man's Sky Origins. Oh my God, I'm so hyped. I'm so excited. Oh my God, it's a new No Man's Sky update. You've been hearing this for all the different updates over all the past, years that all these different No Man's Sky updates have been coming out. But this one right here, this one has the potential to actually be something different and really, change the game into something. And it's funny that I say change because it's not necessarily change it into something new. It's more so like updating it into what it was really supposed to be from the very first trailers that they ever showed, right? And I've been talking about this forever. If you don't know me, I've been keeping up with No Man's Sky from the very earliest E3 trailers. Every trailer, played every single update, got in there and played the game when it first came out. I understand what Hello Games' original vision was with all the procedural nature of everything. I understand what they were going for, and it just seems like with every update that they've came out with, starting with Foundation, right? They added, base building, then they added vehicles, then they added, like a story and like quest, like a campaign side to it. They started adding all these other things that they were never even really supposed to have in the game from the beginning, right? Those were all just like extra things. And this is something I've been trying to say forever and trying to push this whole time. Like, you have got to fix the core of the procedural generation variation to the game, or it's never going to be what you want it to be. It's never going to be that No Man's Sky that we all dreamed of, where it's like absolutely unlimited variations of planet designs and variations of creatures and plants and trees, and every time you go to a new planet, it's like a whole new experience, right? That's the biggest thing I've been saying forever that's pulled the game down. Is the problem is, you see the same creatures just going to like 10 or 15 different planets in the game. You start seeing the same creature models. You start seeing the same plant models very early on in the game. You start seeing the same biome designs. You start seeing all these it's like the procedural generation of the game was not built deep enough. It wasn't to the point where it was expanded enough to where it sort of gave you that true variation feeling when you were going to the different planets. So then it created the feeling of like, well, what the hell is the point in discovering anything if everybody and their grandmother is seeing the same creature models, the same plants, the same rocks, the same, points of interest and all this stuff? What's the point of me even discovering anything and naming it? You guys remember that shit? Back in the day when No Man's Sky was supposed to be this like Christopher Columbus of outer space type game where you went to these new planets and oh my God, you're seeing this whole new world that nobody has ever even seen before, not even the developers of the game, and you're going in there and you're naming all the different creatures because nobody's ever even seen these creatures before. You remember when the game was supposed to be about that and not vehicles and quest and spawn your ship anywhere and like every other game out there that just holds your hand through every single aspect of the game? I really thought Hello Games had their head on straight with that and they weren't going to turn the game into that, but sadly, instead of them going in there and fixing the core of their repetitive procedural generation of their game, instead of doing all that, like what I think they should have done at the very first update, it's like they went down all these other roads to try to make the game appease to more of a broad audience. And you see this with all these different game companies nowadays. Them going in there doing the base building and the vehicles and this and that. Right? And I'm not saying that stuff is like bad in the game. I mean, it's cool to be able to build your base thing. I'm not trying to say they should have never added that. I'm saying they should have fixed the core problem of the game before they started worrying about all that, right? So with this new No Man's Sky Origins update, you just imagine Origins means they're sort of, at least the way I'm taking it, is they're sort of trying to update the origin stuff of the game, what originally was supposed to be the idea of the game, like adding full-blown true water planets where there's no land on the planet at all. It's all water. All these different, giant snake creatures slithering through the desert dunes, full-blown desert dune planets, all these other things that we were seeing in those earlier trailers that the game just didn't have nowhere near the creature, planet, biome, plant variation that it seemed like it was going to have from those early trailers. I mean, we were seeing shark creatures, we were seeing, dinosaur creatures, like, it's just, you got to understand the game, and you have to have played it enough over the years to understand what I'm even saying. But like, dog, it's the problem with procedural generation, right? In any game, if you don't advance it enough and give it enough different, potential scenarios, right, then you start to get this very, very repetitive feeling. And that's the thing with No Man's Sky, right? If you don't have enough variation in the planets and the plants and the biomes and the creatures and all this kind of stuff, NPCs, ships, everything in the game was supposed to be full-blown procedurally generated. That was the whole point of the entire game. That's what you saw in all those early trailers. Every rock, every fish, every ocean, every lake, everything's procedural, right? Well, yeah, you can say it's procedural, but if I go to 5 different planets and I'm already starting to see the things that I've already seen before, how procedural really is it, right? How procedural, how much really is it, this infinite, universe with multiple galaxies, quintillion planets? How much is it really like that if the procedural variation of the game is not even advanced enough to create different scenarios and different biomes and different model types and creatures and animations? If it's not advanced enough to be able to do that to the point to where I'm already seeing the same creature models, like, there's some creature models in No Man's Sky I've literally seen, and I'm not even shitting you, I've literally seen hundreds of times in the game. Hundreds of times. Like, that crab creature model at the beginning was way too repetitive. You've got that, that longer, like, snake, like caterpillar trimmer snake looking creature. It can either be flying, it can be in the water, but you see that same exact creature model all over the place in the game. It might be like different colored, but it's basically the same creature model. You see that same, that like groundhog size little, you guys know, some of you No Man's Sky players know exactly what I'm talking about. There's this selection of like 10 or 15 different creature models that you see in almost every single planet. It's just a slight little variation to it. Like, it's either colored a little bit different. There's that weird little squid, that small little squid creature type thing in the water, but it's like, there's just, and you see that on so many different planets, right? You start to realize all the different plant and rock models they have in the game, right? You start to realize their cactus model, their different little like pre-made rock objects that will be on some of their more hot style planets. You start to, it literally does get to a point pretty quickly where it's like, this shit doesn't even feel even close to a unlimited universe in a game, right? You get to that point very, very quickly. Like, that's the thing. So I'm just hoping, and this Origins update is coming out in the next week, so we'll see what all they're doing with that. But I'm just hoping to God this Origins update is actually going to, bring back, actually advance what the whole game is supposed to be made for, what it's supposed to be. The whole game is supposed to be procedural generation, right? It's not supposed to be these pre-made, creatures that come out at you when you go into a spaceship. It's not meant to be these pre-made, underwater different things that pop out. That's not, it's supposed to be procedural. It's supposed to be where It can create so many different variables to something that when you go land on a new planet, you literally feel like you're the first person discovering this new alien world that nobody has ever seen before, right? Obviously, there's going to be some limitations to that. I understand that. But what I'm getting at is the variation to their procedural generation was not even 1/1000th of what it should have been by the looks of their trailers and stuff before the game came out. It wasn't even 1/1000th of what it seemed like it was going to be, or what you would have expected a quintillion planet, 16 quintillion planet, full life-size planet game would have in it, right? That's when you start to get that whole, people say, you know, No Man's Sky is kind of like, it's an ocean that's only a foot deep, right? You got all unlimited amount of planets to discover, unlimited amount of area to walk on. It's a gigantic game as far as the size of it, but it can be a gigantic game, but then the depth of it not actually be that deep. You understand what I'm saying? That's been the problem with No Man's Sky this whole entire time. I've been trying to say this shit forever, right? This Origins update, you know, when they start really going in there and adjusting on the procedural generation, adjusting on the different kind of biomes and creatures and all that you can run into, and plant designs, and, you know, when they make it to where the trees can be taller and the oceans can be deeper and the caves can be varied and the creatures can be like megalodon-sized underwater creatures or giant dragons come flying through the sky. You know, these crazy abyssal aliens deep in these oceans on these planets. You know, space whale creature, like all these other different variables. That is what No Man's Sky was supposed to be. Okay? And it wasn't just like the variation was just not quite to the level that it should have been from the start. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it wasn't even close. It wasn't even in the same ballpark. It wasn't even in the same stratosphere as what it should have been for a game of this size, right? When you build a game to a certain size, your procedural generation to the game has got to be varied enough to where if it's ever going to make like a similar creature model or because obviously you're going to have, like, you know, if you put like a certain creature model in there, obviously that procedural generation of it is going to adjust the size of the creature. It's going to adjust the color of the creature. It's going to adjust, you know, some of these other, it might change like the tail on it. It might change if it has spikes on the creature, you know, or not. It might change like some of these, you know, all these different attributes to the creatures and the plants and the rocks and everything. Obviously, you're going to get some similarities, but they have got to have something in the game to where it's very careful in putting like similar creatures, plants, rocks, biomes, and all that within like a close, you know, area of the actual game. You know, you don't want like very, very similar biomes in solar systems that are really close together, right? You don't want very, very similar creatures in, I mean, good Lord, you got 16 quintillion planets. Surely to goodness, you can spread that shit out a little bit in some kind of a way. Surely to goodness. So, but anyways, with this whole Origin update, that's got to be what that means, right? With Origin, that's got to be what it means. That they're going to be sort of going back, updating some of those original core issues to the game. And we've actually had some, you know, they've updated the procedural generation in some of these updates over the years, but it's never been the main focal point, right? We've never had a No Man's Sky update that was just all made around the variation to the game. We've never really had that before. We've had a lot of these little side updates, and, you know, sometimes they'll make variation changes to the planets and shit like behind. It's like a little side thing to the main update, right? But we've never had a full update just strictly dedicated to that in particular, all right? So, but one thing we have had happen is when they do make these little procedural generation changes, right? I remember when they added like the different colors to the water and some of these other things. They added an update that made a lot of the planets be a lot more like Earth-like planets. Sometimes these updates haven't necessarily just made the variation better. Sometimes it's actually changed it. In certain occasions, it's changed it to make it worse, right? So there's some really cool things that you used to see that you don't even see anymore because of some little thing that they've changed in there within the procedural generation variation of the game. So they've got to be really careful with that, because when they change any little thing, then it's like it affects the entire universe of the game. You know, no pun intended, it literally affects the entire universe. It affects how the creatures are made, it affects how the planets are made, it affects how the biome, and all that like works together. So they have to be really careful when they just update one little aspect to the variation over here. It's almost like they don't even need to touch the procedural or the variation of the game unless they do it like all in one humongous update, all in one big update that is just strictly dedicated to the procedural generation variation of the game. Then you can actually do that, right? But that's the thing, it changes where the planets are. I mean, there's been multiple updates where they adjusted on that, and then you couldn't go back to any of the older planets you had been before. It like changed the position of them, it changed the biomes of them, it changed everything about the planets of the game and the way everything was on the planet. So they've got this weird thing going on where, I don't know if they're ever going to get it to the point where it truly is just like a boom, this is the set universe. I don't know. Maybe they can get to the point where it's like they stop changing that original that original galaxy, and then every update they do with procedural generation, it's like that's the next galaxy that you go to, right? And then the next galaxy that you go to. You see what I'm saying? They could kind of figure out a system like that where they don't have to continue to totally change the entire universe world of the game every update, right? So it's like a whole new restart every single update they come out with. They're going to have to figure out a better system to that, because that shit's insane. You just can't keep up with anything. You don't feel like you can do an actual full-blown playthrough of the game and like name things and go back to older planets and do all that, because as soon as they come out with a new update, all that is just swept away. You feel like you're playing an early access game that's not, it's not the final version, not the final product of it. So I just really hope they're going to get this Origins update right. I want to see giant creatures. I want to see teeny tiny little creatures. I want to see literally hundreds of thousands of more variations to the way the creature models can be. And I want the trees to be able to be, way more alien and way taller than they can be currently. I want to go into a gigantic, crazy alien forest that I can't even see out of. It's like crazy 100-foot tall canopies, crazy. Like, let me just give you a good little example right here, right? So, if you've ever played the Burning Crusade expansion to World of Warcraft, right? Going back old school here. You know how each one of those zones was like a completely different world, right? Hellfire's Peninsula was like this whole wild, crazy thing, right? Then you went to Zangarmarsh, and it was like this, crazy tall mushroom alien world. You had these like hydras down in the water and all this crazy shit. All these crazy like creatures and different, walking abyssal creatures and shit. Then you went to Blade's Edge Mountain, and it's like a totally different super spire, crazy, terrain with all these different crazy colors and a totally different alien world, right? Then you go to Nagrand, right? And it's a totally different world than all those other zones you just went into. You got these like crazy purple things. You got floating islands with waterfalls and all these other completely different kind of creatures. And it's a totally different vibe than all the other zones, right? Then you go to, Netherstorm, Shadow Moon, right? You go to all these other zones. That's what, in a nutshell, every planet that you go to on No Man's Sky should feel like a whole new World of Warcraft Burning Crusade zone. That's like one of the easiest ways I could explain it, right? That's what it should feel like. Completely different creature types, all different sizes of creatures, totally different biome design, crazy tall mushroom, alien world, and then you come over here to like a barren Hellfire Peninsula wasteland, right? Then you go over to, Takar Forest or whatever, and it's like a whole giant forest with this cool, like misty, cloudy type vibe to it. You got like moths flying around and cool shit. That, in a nutshell, is what No Man's Sky's planets should be in a way. Every planet should be like a whole new, World of Warcraft Burning Crusade zone, right? In every way that you could imagine that. So hopefully this Origins update can kind of get back to that. But so let me give you an example of what No Man's Sky has felt like, right? When you go to a World of Warcraft zone, right, and you start seeing a bunch of the same kind of creatures and mob types and all that you just saw in a zone that you were just in, right? Or you see a biome or a zone that looks like it's been very similar replicated off of a zone you've already been in, right? That's what No Man's Sky feels like in a nutshell, right? Every new planet that you go to doesn't even really feel like a new experience anymore, because once you go to 50 planets in the game or 100 planets in the game, you feel like you've just about seen everything there is in the game. And it shouldn't be like that, right? It should take you 10,000 planets to go to in the game before you even remotely start seeing any similarities to anything, right? That's my whole point. I've been saying this whole time, that procedural generation is just nowhere near developed enough. It's nowhere near advanced enough. So you get this, you may have this endless game, but it starts to get that real bad side of procedural gaming, where you start to feel like you're just going down the same pathways, the same exact replicated, duplicated tunnels, and same exact replicated, pathways and hallways and shit, right? You've seen some of those games where they're procedural, that may have unlimited, replayable creations that it can make, but if there's not enough variation to it, it's going to get this very stagnant, repetitive, stale. That's been the biggest problem with No Man's Sky. Everybody tries to turn it into all this other shit, people that don't really understand the game, but in reality, that's been the biggest problem. If they truly fix that, if they truly add the variation to the game in the procedural variation to the game that it was supposed to have from the beginning, you won't even need anything else in the game, dog. Just going to a new planet will be interesting enough. Just discovering that new creature and naming that new creature, knowing that nobody else in the entire game has ever seen that creature, nobody else may ever see that creature, that's an awesome feeling. And that's what the game was supposed to be all about, man. And if you want to, if you have that amazing, what No Man's Sky was supposed to be from the beginning, if you have all that procedural shit and it's making unlimited, truly an unlimited filling to the creatures, plants, rocks, biomes, planets, and all that, if it's really doing that, then you can go in there and add things like, okay, now we can build our bases on these unlimited biome different planets, right? Oh, now we can get in vehicles. Okay. Now, then you can start adding all that other stuff, but it should have never been added before this Origins update, right? So I'm just hoping that's what they do with it. We'll just have to wait and see. Could you imagine how fucking cool that would be if you dropped down on a planet where the entire planet was water? There was no land on it at all. Like, that thing they promised before the game came out, right? Jump down in the water, and the water is so deep you can't even see to the bottom. Okay? So you get this whole, like, Subnautica level gameplay and super deep, giant, abyssal creatures at the bottom of this ocean. You got giant, leviathans and shit down at the water, and you're just like exploring this new world, this new underwater world on this one planet, inside of this one game, inside of this one universe, right? Could you imagine how badass that would be if the game was really like that instead of what it is right now? Could you imagine the YouTube content and oh my God, dude, the game would be amazing. Or if you drop down on this full desert dune planet, there's like no buildings on the entire planet, and you just see this giant, humongous snake, creature comes out of the ground, right? Could you imagine that shit? There's just none of that in the game. You don't have these amazing mystical worlds that have floating islands with waterfalls coming off the floating island and all this. You just don't have that. And that's a lot of the things that they showed in those early trailers. And the game is just not even like that. It's just not. The jungles are not... The forest, the jungles are nowhere near dense enough, nowhere near thick enough. When you go into a spot of trees, it don't even feel like you're actually in a forest. Trees aren't tall enough. There's not enough bush and, foliage and shit in between. There's not enough trees. The oceans aren't deep enough. The caves aren't extensive enough and varied enough to be interesting to even go into. So, yeah, either way, we'll see what they do with this Origins update. I'll make some more videos on it, but definitely let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Appreciate you guys watching all the videos. Later, dudes.